Welcome, everyone. So excited to have you all joining us for our Lunch and Learn today. This is a special Lunch and Learn that we are having about a super important topical issue. How can we expand the conversation on affordable housing? And we are so grateful to have Nancy O'Regan and Pauline McIntosh, who are going to be both helping us begin some of this conversation together, and hopefully we will have a chance to talk together collectively about this very important issue. But first, we want to begin with a land acknowledgement. So if you see on the bottom right, placenames.mapdev.ca is the website that we recommend because it's interactive and it helps you zero in on the specific town or region where you are joining us from. And it also talks a little bit about where, how to pronounce and those kinds of things. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Unama'ki, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating this acknowledgement into action. By seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education, we commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty partners. We commit to learning and to unlearning. Let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. When we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. And especially when we're thinking about land acknowledgements and we're thinking about the land where we are mindful of the ways in which so much of what we do when we're talking about housing and homelessness is connected to this larger colonial experience that we are all participating in, willingly or unwillingly. And so there's deeper systemic issues that are part of this work. So I am so incredibly excited to have Pauline, and I'm going to have Pauline here, and then we also have Nancy, and they're going to both have a chance to introduce themselves and to speak a little bit more about this important issue. And I wanted to just say a few words about how today's conversation began. Of course, housing is a top issue. So the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, we are working with many people, a whole coalition around poverty and around housing, and working with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and Shelter Nova Scotia. And so many different organizations to try to advocate for psychosocial determinants of health. Super excited that there's some conversations happening with Nova Scotia Health around social prescribing. But this is such a large, profound issue that's impacting us all and that's gotten so much worse. And we, even with all of our advocacy, our social justice committee is sitting here, even though we did a big ideas in mental health to look at how mental health and housing is interrelated, we realize that it's getting so much worse every single minute and that our members are struggling with it. And one of the things that happened this summer is there's a group of social workers in Pictou County that do wonderful work and that meet regularly, and that hopefully all of our other geographic regions will do what they do and meet regularly. And they had reached out to some of the folks at St. FX. Pauline and Nancy were amongst them, and they were wanting to talk about their research, what they're doing, and have this conversation around housing. That meeting didn't happen, variety of complications, but I reached out when I learned about this and said, you know, more than just Pictou County wants to talk about housing. And so I'm so grateful that both Nancy and Pauline are here, and they're going to share a little bit more about some of their work and some, hopefully expand the conversation on housing, but then hopefully we can all join together and come up with some ideas of ways that we as a body of social workers can come up with a plan, especially as we prepare for our next advocacy day, which we're doing in partnership with Shelter Nova Scotia, Canadian Mental Health Association, the Legal Information Society of Nova Scotia, libraries across the province, and all of our different healthcare providers, doctors, psychologists. We're so grateful for our growing coalition of folks advocating for psychosocial determinants of health. So grateful for all of that. And I'm going to invite Pauline and Nancy to introduce themselves, and then please feel free to use the chat for questions and comments. And at the end, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for that as well. So thank you so much. So excited.
Thank you, Naj. I'm just delighted and humbled to be with you folks today. I certainly want to add to Naj's land acknowledgement. And in our work, Nancy and I typically would also acknowledge the Black communities in Nova Scotia, and to recognize the very long history of the Black people in our province and people of African Nova Scotian descent, along with our Indigenous and Mi'kmaq colleagues and friends. And to recognize the tremendous impact our Black and people of African descent have had on our communities, and the injustices that they've been served, and how we also endeavor to work closely with these colleagues and neighbors to ensure a better future for them as we move forward in the province. So thank you, Naj, for sharing such a wonderful acknowledgement of the lands that we live on, and to also say that we recognize our Black communities and the richness they bring as well. And we are absolutely delighted to be here with all of you folks from the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers today. We're honored to be asked to share this space with you. We recognize all of the tremendous work that you do across the province, and we are just absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to come and speak with you, and to share with you, and to learn with you and from you. So we really appreciate the opportunity. Nancy and I will introduce ourselves, and then we're going to tell you a bit about some of the work that we've been engaged in related to affordable housing in particular over the last couple of years. And I'm sure that we can offer some ways for you folks to become engaged in the work that we're doing, and to help build a movement really at the community level to address and hopefully become contributors to solutions to the affordable housing crisis that we currently find ourselves in, not only in Nova Scotia, but of course nationally and even further afield. This has truly become a global issue, and one that we're all very focused on. Nancy, please say hello and tell the folks a little bit about you. We're delighted that you could join us. I know that you got stuck in traffic on the way, so glad that you're here, and look forward to hearing from you first.
Good morning, everyone. I echo Pauline, just so pleased to be able to share it. You don't often get to step back from the work and just talk a little bit about it to others. And I think it's exciting to know that the social workers in this province in particular are really interested to know how they can help and how they can come to be more engaged in this work. So I'm Nancy O'Regan. I come from Guysborough County in a community called Cooks Cove. I work and live there as a community development facilitator. I do some project management work, but I'm currently the support staff for the new Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association. In my volunteer life, though, and I think that's where I'm getting the most knowledge and perspective, is I'm a co-chair for the Guysborough County Housing Network. And I think we're in our 4th year of really trying to pull together people to really talk about housing and learn about housing and look at how we can solve some problems there. So that perspective always informs what I'm seeing at the provincial level and really keeps me grounded in a way for me to volunteer and have some impact in my own community. And happy to work with Pauline all the time.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm delighted to have you with us. And again, my name is Pauline McIntosh, and I'm currently employed at St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. And I started my career here at St. FX with the St. FX Extension Department that existed for more than 90 years and had a long and strong tradition in community development in the form of adult education and collective action. I'm sure that you've all heard of the Antigonish movement that started here in the early part of the 1900s and continues to inform the work that we do today. And the St. FX Extension Department had a very long tradition in supporting social housing in the province. In fact, Extension facilitated the very first cooperative housing development back in 1935, I believe it was, in Cape Breton. So that was the start of our housing work. And our housing work continued until the late 70s, early 80s. And then there was a hiatus until about 2018 when I went to my director and said, I think there's something that we can add to this conversation in the province. And he certainly agreed. And we've been igniting a new community housing program here at the university since that time. And in 2021, the university decided to merge the St. FX Extension Department with the Coady International Institute. And together we form Coady Institute. So perhaps we'll just do a little bit of storytelling and share with you the journey that Nancy and I have been on professionally and as volunteers over the last couple of years. And like Nancy, I am also a volunteer in the community housing sector. So in my personal life, I sit on the board of the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society here in Antigonish, and we provide 28 units of housing. We have built 28 units of housing for people who live on low income in Antigonish town and county. And I also sit on the board of the Nova Scotia Cooperative Council, which is the member organizations for co-ops and credit unions in the province. And we too are developing an affordable housing portfolio. And I think at last count, in 2 years, we have either acquired or built over 80 units of affordable housing, and that portfolio is continuing to grow like wildfire. So Nancy and I both are very grounded in our volunteer community work, where we live and breathe and engage with our neighbors and other members of our community. And we're very, very focused on creating affordable housing solutions as volunteers as well as professionally. Having said that, as I mentioned, in 2018, the then Extension Department decided to host a provincial people's school on affordable housing. And a people's school is a very traditional method of the Antigonish movement that focuses on starting a conversation of contemporary importance with the people most affected by the issue. So bringing people together in a room, starting with their knowledge, starting with their experience, and building from there. It can also involve injecting new information into the conversation and creating and co-creating new knowledge as part of that process. So on a blustery March day in 2018, Extension had partnered with a local housing organization and brought together, I think we had over 100 people registered, but I think because of the weather, we had about 65 people who showed up from all across the province to talk about our vision for affordable housing, what we would like to see. We also talked about what was hindering this work, what was helping us do the work, and what we could each take away from that day and continue to work on as either private citizens, as members of community organizations, as members of government organizations, as members of universities, and so on and so forth. And that led to having a second People's School the following year, where Extension then partnered with 2 local housing organizations, and we partnered with Cape Breton University with a now colleague and friend, Dr. Catherine Leviton-Reed, who just does absolutely amazing research related to affordable housing. And in 2019, the focus of our People's School was building community research capacity to address housing goals. So really starting to get into it at that point. And because of this work that started to gain some attention across the province, St. FX Extension was asked by a national organization called the Community Housing Transformation Center, which was formed as part of the federal national housing strategy that was launched, I believe, in 2017 now. The time is passing so quickly. And we were asked to partner with that organization to do a whole series of consultations across the province to figure out how we could strengthen the community housing sector in Nova Scotia. So Nancy and I had actually worked together at Extension 20 years prior. And this call came in 2019, and Nancy and I had been running into each other at the community level, both in our volunteer work and in some other circles, to talk about housing. And Nancy very kindly and graciously agreed to come back and work with me on this project that became known as Build Together, strengthening the community housing sector in Nova Scotia. And when we started, the community housing sector was defined as both cooperative and other forms of nonprofit housing in the province. So it didn't include public housing, it didn't include market housing. It was looking specifically at co-op and other forms of nonprofits. And we quickly learned that the co-op housing side of the coin, co-op housing, was being very well supported by the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. And their Atlantic office is actually located in Halifax, and that group of folks were being well served. So Nancy and I and other team members who are working with us, we turned our attention to looking at how we could support the other nonprofit housing providers here. So we did a series of 4 community engagement processes across the province. And of course, this was all during the lockdown of 2020. So we had great plans to travel, get in the car, head over the road, get out and actually talk to people in community. And we did do that, but we ended up doing it from our desks. I mean, we did the talking part. We did it from our desks on Zoom, much like we're doing right now. And we went out, and the first thing we had to do was try to identify, where do these organizations exist? One of the issues is there was no network of organizations doing this kind of work in the province. So we had to identify an inventory, who's doing the work, what does it look like, where is it happening, all of those kinds of things. And once we did, well, we were still building that body of knowledge, but we decided to go out and ask people from a very asset-based approach, what's working well? What successes are you having? What are you seeing that's improving affordable housing in your community? And then, of course, we asked, where do we need to build capacity? Where can we strengthen this work? We asked things like, who are you connecting with in your work? Has that been helpful? And if so, why? And who would you like to connect with? And finally, we asked questions around, what kinds of changes would you like to see that would make it easier for you to do your work better, smarter, faster, for greater positive impact and change? And Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Maybe you can illuminate what some of those findings were and where that took us at that part of the process.
Great. Thanks, Pauline. We had a fabulous time speaking with groups all across the province. We were surprised by the numbers that showed up and wanted to talk about, municipal involvement and engagement. They wanted to talk about the struggles they were having with finding funding partners, and they wanted to share the successes they'd had around engaging community and learning about the issue of housing. And so those conversations were really great opportunities for storytelling around the successes, but also around what was needed. And as that first project kind of drew together, we were able to pull out from that what some of the specific needs are around strengthening the community housing sector. One of them was about capacity building, and capacity building sort of across a number of areas, but primarily capacity building for community organizations who want to become housing providers. What kinds of supports do they need? What knowledge do they need? What skills do they need? Because becoming a housing provider, as Pauline often says, is not for the faint of heart. It needs knowledge about everything from environmental sustainability to social values and ethics to the economic side of it. You need accountants and engineers and architects and builders and a whole range of skill sets from community to be able to be successful. So we learned that, the learning that needs to happen for a group to develop its governance, its strength in being able to apply for projects and be successful was really hindered by there not being capacity building activities and ways for people to learn. That was sort of one of the key areas. There's certainly a need for shared programs and services. People expressed to us that, that they would love to work together more, to be able to share more, to benefit from things like better insurance policies, or be able to bulk purchase and find ways to build housing in a way that was, going to save them the most and to be the most efficient. But the biggest conversations we had were around partnerships and strategic partnerships. Who do we need to be working with at a provincial level, at a national level, to take this work further? And we certainly identified, areas like, public health, some of the other government departments, other provincial organizations that we really need to work more closely together and start to look at, here's all the work that's needed to be done and who are the right people to bring to the table to share in that work. At the same time, we really became quite intentional about thinking about how are we not just saying we want to, embrace diversity and inclusion, but what are we doing about that? And how do we make sure that this is not just a conversation that is excluding others and that does not hear all of the voices? So we did some other research and added some components to make sure that we were creating spaces where we could listen and hear from Indigenous communities and organizations, as well as African Nova Scotian members, and trying to hear what some of the experiences were around affordable housing. Where we really struggled and we really, never felt that we really were able to reach a lot of the other communities that we know. We didn't speak a lot to the immigrant communities. We didn't get a chance to do a lot of work on the LGBTQ plus communities. We were not able to pull together folks that were working on housing because they're not specifically working on housing. They're working on multitudes of other issues and all of the things that intersect around that. So we pulled together what we were able to gather and started to hear very clearly from across the province that the sector wanted to be more organized. It wanted to form some kind of organization, and it really wanted to build the capacity to allow community and affordable housing to thrive and to be able to replicate from each other's successes what was working well. So that first project kind of wrapped up with a sense of we kind of know where we need to go and to take the next steps towards sort of making that happen and building a little bit further down that path. So we were able to take some really key important issues and pull them forward more as values than as, areas of work to emphasize on, but some sort of overarching values that would guide the work in the next part of the process. And I'm going to pass it over to Pauline and let her articulate those values.
Thanks, Nancy. That's a great summary of where we were. And just before I talk about the values, I do want to share that one of the most interesting findings from the work that we did in that mass community engagement process is that more than half of the people who came out for the meetings online were not housing providers. More than half of the folks who came out to be part of the conversation were not housing providers. They were other nonprofit organizations whose primary mandate was not housing, but housing was intersecting so closely with their work that they felt they needed to be part of the conversation. They were municipal leaders, they were credit unions, they were concerned citizens, they were other researchers and people, practitioners in other areas. And it really showed how housing is cross-cutting the whole spectrum of society at the moment. There were people who were coming out or concerned about market housing, which wasn't our focus, but it's across the spectrum that the housing crisis that currently exists. And while that may have seemed like a bit of an outlier to have that finding, it impacted what we did next in terms of helping people build a provincial organization. So just before we get to that, Nancy mentioned values. And for the very first time as part of the Build Together process, we were able to come together in person on October 25th of 2021. We came together in a meeting room in Truro, tried to make it sort of a central part of the province. We were only allowed to have 25 people, I think, in the space, and we had another 10 or 15 people or so online. And we came together with the purpose in mind of starting to develop a model for how we would work together. And that didn't happen until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The whole day was overtaken by a conversation about what are the values that need to inform anything we do together going forward. And serendipitously, there was a woman at the hotel who heard people talking in the lobby about a conversation happening around housing. And she came into the room and she asked if she could join us. And we said, of course. And it turned out that she was someone who was homeless, who was being temporarily housed at this hotel in Truro, she and her 2 children. And she sat in for the day and spent the day with us. And it was so impactful having her voice in the room. It was clearly meant to be that all of our paths crossed on that day, and we ended up just having an incredibly important and powerful conversation. And out of that, the values that were articulated were that as a group of people working together to create nonprofit housing solutions in this province, we believe in housing as a human right. That's the fundamental belief that we work on. We believe in creating housing that is environmentally friendly and leads to climate sustainability, that we believe in providing the necessary supports and services to people who are housing insecure and in need of nonprofit housing, that we believe in ending the racism and stigma that keep people from being appropriately housed. And there is one more, and of course it's the 5th one that's just not coming to mind right now. Nancy, can you think of it?
Navigation?
I think navigation was part of the supports and services. Anyway, there's one more that will come to one of us or the other, I'm sure. And so around 2 o'clock that afternoon, with our day coming to an end at 4, we had these values articulated, and I think everyone felt really, really good about that. And we had really good representation in that physical and virtual space from Indigenous communities, from Black communities, from other communities that we had worked really hard to engage in the process. And then we started thinking about what is the model for what it is we're going to do together. And just to state it even more firmly than what Nancy has already mentioned, we didn't set out to build an organization that we would then invite people into. The idea was that we would take the building blocks, put them on the table, and that we would all build the organization together. And it hasn't been perfect. We haven't been able to achieve that 100%. There's no question that it's been an imperfect process, but that has always been the underlying goal of the work that we're doing. We had an engagement team across the province working with us as part of this, volunteers. And the first agenda item of every meeting was, who isn't here that should be here? So this was definitely an overarching theme of all of the work that we did. And again, it's imperfect, but it's what we continue to strive for in the work. And so that was October of 2021. And by Christmas of that year, we had a model that I'm going to show you in a moment. But before I do, I want to share with you our website, which is located on the Coady Institute website. And if you go to that website, you'll find a button that says Community Housing Program. And in that page, there are 4 particular projects. And Build Together 1 and 2 appears, I have a second screen over here, so I'm just going to look this way for a moment. Build Together 1 and 2 will help you find all of the findings of these community engagement processes that we were involved in. I'm just going to click here and make sure I can get to them. Sometimes they feel like they're a tiny bit buried. So it might take me just a second, but you'll see that there were 4 consultations that happened in that first year, and all of those findings exist here. So I would welcome you to go in and take a look, because there's a lot of good information here that might be of interest to you. We also published 7 thematic briefs. So these aren't peer-reviewed documents or anything of that nature. They are very accessibly written briefs that share what some of the themes were that came out of that process. So one is around learning from success, one is around funding, another is around capacity building, the next is around diversity, equity, inclusion. There's one here related to policy development, one that speaks about values and beliefs, and one that talks about visibility, voice, and collaboration within the sector. You will also see that this time coincided with the work of the Nova Scotia Commission on Affordable Housing, as well as the Housing for All document that was produced by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. So what we did was we took those 2 documents and did a bit of a comparative analysis on what we were hearing from the Build Together project, and this appears right here. And there were newsletters that were published throughout this whole process to keep people informed and share findings. So these are here as well. And of course, there are all kinds of little videos. This is our colleague, Colleen Cameron, who couldn't be with us today. This is a member of Mel Sturck from Phoenix and Halifax, who's been with the process throughout. And this is Renee Hébert, who is our partner with Community Housing Transformation Center. So there's all kinds of things on this website, articles that were in the news and so on and so forth, that might be of interest to you as you explore this topic. Additionally, we had a second project that was happening at the same time that was looking at affordable housing through the lens of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this was a separate project that was funded by Employment and Social Development Canada. And this project enabled us to offer a series of webinars that brought information to the community about what the actual United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are, and what do they mean, and how can they be helpful as a lens for looking at affordable housing in the province. We also did a webinar on community planning and the SDGs. So this takes a much closer look at environmental and sustainability considerations. And then the final webinar was really highlighting some of the programs, the funding programs that exist nationally through the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, that are very geared toward the creation of environmentally sustainable housing options. So those are 3 of the webinars that we did. I mentioned People's Schools previously as a traditional tool of the Antigonish movement and the work of the St. FX Extension Department. And here, from our findings from the Build Together project, we were able to isolate 5 sustainable development goals that link very closely to affordable housing. And then we did online forums, online people schools about each of these goals. So we started with the knowledge of the people who came into that Zoom room. We always had a resource person with us who could add more information. And together we co-created new knowledge related to these particular SDGs as they pertain to affordable housing in the province. And these might be of interest to you. And for all of these things, there's a video recording as well as a written document. We wanted to make sure it was available to folks in more than one format to make it more accessible. But you'll see here that we really dug into the topic of the role of municipalities in affordable housing. We spent a lot of time working on diversity, equity, inclusion, decolonization, and affordable housing, and we have a people school here in that regard. We looked at health outcomes and affordable housing. This was very, very interesting, as well as having a people school on environmental sustainability, and of course, one on affordable housing, and the very first of the SDGs that talks about no poverty. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with the SDGs, but the main premise of Agenda 2030 is, of course, to leave no one behind. And we really use that cross-cutting theme as it relates to affordable housing in the province of Nova Scotia. And I think at this point, Nancy, maybe I'll ask you to walk through the model that was created for how people plan to work together in our newly formed Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association. And I'm mindful that it's 12:38. And so we'll try to work through this fairly efficiently, Naj, so we can leave some time for questions in case people have some specific topics they'd like us to say a little bit more about. Nancy?
Great, thanks, Pauline. So we struggled around a model because typically in Nova Scotia, nonprofit groups kind of follow the same model. They register as a nonprofit organization and they have a governance model and a board of directors and off they go. And we were really struggling to not create a hierarchical model and to create a model that was really informed always by what was happening in community. So in this model, you'll see a number of stars across the top, and those stars represent regional housing networks, so that all of this work gets informed by what's actually happening across the region. And so those regional networks haven't fully been defined yet, but for example, there might be one for the Strait area, or there might be one for one section of Cape Breton or part of the South Shore. The groups that have been naturally meeting about housing will likely become the foundation for those, and then we'll work out from there. And so we see regional housing networks as the place where all of the people who are really concerned about housing can become involved. It could be clergy, women's centers, shelter groups, community organizations, municipalities, people who are working on food security. It could be people working in transportation or other areas, people working around child and youth, and places where the issues and the policy needs can kind of bubble up to the provincial organization. We want to be able to be aware of what is happening, where are people feeling challenged in the work of creating affordable housing, and then how can we address that at a provincial level and create the advocacy and policy around that. So the whole model is grounded in a mechanism to allow us to hear from and constantly be informed by community-based work, which is really where the heart and soul of affordable housing is. The middle piece is really about, having an actual nonprofit housing association. And so we did form that, and it is an association of organizations. So nonprofit housing providers, informal groups, coalitions, and networks are can all be members of the Nonprofit Housing Association, as well as associate members, government organizations. We wanted to have a really broad, opportunity for people to join the association and in a number of ways to be able to participate. The Housing Association, the way it's structured now, is that voting members and members who are on the board of directors come from nonprofit housing providers, and the informal organizations, coalitions, and networks that support that work. As you can see in the middle, all those arrows are really all the forms of strategy and the work that needs to be done around communication, around research and policy, capacity building, how to build really good partnerships and collaborate better, and offering programs and services. So the work that the community groups need, the work that the issues need to be able to move and to have some change, and that all of that is more fluid. At the very base, there's a bit of a part of the model that's really around our strategic provincial partners. The co-op sector, health, education, funding organizations, other levels of government, it could be justice, it could be other provincial groups, that this model would really have a way for everyone to be able to become engaged. And Pauline, I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'll just say one more thing before we open up for questions, and that is we would really encourage the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers to become involved in this work. And I think there's an opportunity as a strategic provincial partner. There's definitely the door is open for that kind of work. There would be a tremendous assets to bear if you folks became involved in the regional housing networks. And I've remembered the fifth value, as I knew I would. The fifth value is to bring more equity to rural and urban Nova Scotia.
Yes,
as it relates.
My favorite.
As soon as Nancy started talking about the regional housing networks, it came to me, because that's the main reason for these regional housing networks, is to make sure that we're bringing equity as it pertains to rural and urban organizations who are working to create affordable housing solutions. It's also a place in these regional housing networks to really engage First Voice. Because we know that First Voice are obviously the folks that are most impacted by the housing crisis. They're not necessarily populating housing organizations because they're so focused on getting
or at the table. Yeah,
or at the table. And while we continue to try to open space for people most affected by the issue to be the decision makers, there's definitely a place to do that at these regional housing networks. And on our website, if you go to the model itself, you can also find a document that describes every single aspect of this model in quite a bit of detail. And if you just hover over the various component parts, you can read about each of those. But there's definitely, I think, a role that you folks can play at the regional housing network level. I think there's definitely potential for you to be a key strategic partner. I think there is also tremendous opportunity for you to become involved, particularly in the area pertaining to research, policy development, and advocacy. Another main feature of the regional housing networks is that if we see a research item coming up in several regional housing networks, then we know there's probably an issue that needs to be addressed provincially. The same is true at the policy level. If organizations in Yarmouth and the Tri-Counties are dealing with a particular hurdle or opportunity, does that also exist in Cape Breton? Is there, are these the seeds that we need to be working on related to research, capacity building, policy development, and of course, advocacy? So this network hopefully will enable the province to come together and speak with one voice. And I also just wanted to note that the idea behind these regional housing networks is that there are 10 suggested. It might end up being 8, it could end up being 12. That's completely fluid. But our hope is that 2 of these regional housing networks will be dedicated to Mi'kmaq and people of Indigenous people living in Nova Scotia, and 1 for Black Nova Scotians and people of African descent, because those 2 communities have such specific needs and contextual factors, and their history has been so different from all of the others. It's really important to provide a voice for those communities to work together, be supported together, and be supported by people from their communities, while being supported by the Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association. So again, that's the intention, and it gives us something to work toward. And I'll just conclude by saying that all of this has come out of the consultations that we have had the privilege to facilitate. Nancy and I are the folks who've just brought people together and tried to open spaces. All of this comes from the people who've participated. And I should also acknowledge there were others who were working with us as part of these projects. One of our colleagues, Catherine Irving, is just a tremendous writer and was able to pull together many of the thematic briefs and documentation as part of the process. And our communications folks have supported us in all of this work. So we haven't done it alone. We've had internal colleagues supporting us, and we've also, as I mentioned, had a community engagement team of volunteers across the province who really cared about this work and wanted to become involved and support the efforts. So, and of course, all of the people who've participated. And since that time, we had the actual founding meeting of the Nova Scotia Nonprofit Housing Association last October here at St. FX and virtually. And there have been 3 collaborative teams who've worked all this winter to get some of the groundwork in place. And then we had an interim board and volunteers. And when the organization finally became certified with the province, we then have an elected board of directors, and they're just going great guns, really accomplishing a lot. With Nancy and I continuing to support those efforts. And we are very close to announcing who the new leadership of the organization will be. That will happen early in October, that will make that public, and the work will continue. And I would just encourage all of you to consider volunteering in your local community in any kind of housing organization that exists there, whether it's an informal group, network, or coalition, or whether it's an official housing provider. There's just so much energy that's needed at the local level, and the experience and knowledge and assets and abilities that you folks all have would just bring such tremendous energy and I'm sure joy, and such a wonderful ability to really enhance the work of these local organizations. Naj, we will stop there. Thank you so much for this time to speak with you.
Thank you so incredibly much for this. And let me put myself here as well. So let us consider this the beginning of what will hopefully be a formal relationship with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. Certainly, of course, I have to consult with our Social Justice Committee and, of course, with our council and go through our channels. But this reflects exactly the kind of work that we have been trying to do as part of just decolonizing all of the silos that keep us from working together in partnership. I have been composing an email that is going to link up some of the people that we've been working with so that we can work together in a larger work. This actually is the advocacy work that we have been doing at the Nova Scotia College of trying to collapse silos across all of the healthcare providers and across all of the different organizations so that we can begin to build a clinical model of counseling where when people come to a social worker and say, I am depressed because of so many injustices that are leading to housing insecurity and other issues, rather than saying, oh, let me do some cognitive behavioral therapy and help you not be depressed, which we know does not work with more than half of the people who have neurodiversity. That is an imperfect and harmful practice, actually. That instead, what we should be doing is linking people to other people struggling with this so that we can have group social work where we can work together as a group and amplify voices of those people that we're working with who have, and so we're really working on building first voice living libraries, trying to advocate for the ways in which our social workers can help empower and advocate. And that's why we have not just our advocacy day, but our advocacy toolkit, where our Social Justice Committee is working on how to complain guide. And if there are members who are watching this right now who want to join us, please let me know so that we can have large coalitions. Maybe we even have like a whole social worker housing contingent that are part of this. So I have lots of dreams, and anyone who knows me knows I do. So I'm excited and so grateful to you, and grateful to the Pictou County Social Workers Group. And shout out, we're doing our Communities of Practice event next week. So please check. The whole point of Communities of Practice is that we can build a community of practice specifically designated to housing, so that instead of people in this community saying, I have to reinvent the wheel, no, we already have the consultations, we already have the themes. It is done beautifully by you. But how many of us even knew that this existed, right? So if we can draw on the work that you did and amplify your work and bring together the people who are doing other work in different areas, then we can actually work on decolonizing the silos that keep us from working together and work towards the kind of wellness that we are advocating for. So really grateful to all of you. And please put your questions or comments here. And also just a reminder that we have, this counts as either formal professional development, or it will meet your social justice requirement. So we now have a requirement. You have to do social justice as part of professional development. So this will meet you, and hopefully you will join and volunteer, and that'll meet as well, and probably address some of the vicarious trauma and helplessness that we have. So absolutely thank you to you all for sharing some of this work, sharing some of these resources, sharing for those people who don't know about the anti-Ganesh movement. You referenced it a little bit, but we have a lot of people who are who may not know it. So that was one of the questions that came up. I don't know in the 6 minutes if you have anything that you want to share specific to that, and how we can then be inspired by that to expand it. And you're muted.
Oh, sorry, Naj. I was just popping the website address into the chat, and I've taken you back just one layer before the community housing program, and it's called community engagement. And on this part of the website, you'll see one of the historic pieces that has informed the anti-Ganesh movement, or it's not informed, I should say. I'm going to share it actually. It is an encapsulation of what the anti-Ganesh movement was about. And there you can see it now, I think. So it was all about economic and political democracy. A lot of people were living in very dire straits in Nova Scotia in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. And the people began to organize. And this is a very, very long history with a lot of detail, and I certainly won't get into all of that. But the people began to organize, and at that time, there were two Roman Catholic priests, Father Moses Michael Cody and Father James Tompkins, who were two of the leading characters in the anti-Ganesh movement, and they both were at St. FX, and they were really considered community agitators. They went out and met with people on the wharves and in the mines and in the people doing forestry, and started talking to them about how they could come together collectively in adult education and collective action to create better lives for themselves. And there are some principles that have been articulated about the anti-Ganesh movement, which you'll find on our website. But there's a whole piece here on the history of the anti-Ganesh movement. There are lots of books that have been written about it, but it all informs the mission, the approach of the work that I do today. And as it has come into the Cody Institute, we have a shared DNA. The Cody Institute was named after Father Moses Michael Cody, who became a Monsignor, and Cody was the very first director, excuse me, of the St. FX Extension Department, which was formed in 1928. And because of the work that was happening here in the Maritimes in Canada, people started to come here from the South, from what we were then calling the developing South. Of course, the South would not call themselves the developing South, but people started to come here to learn more about what was happening in terms of the co-op and credit union movement, in terms of the organizing for people's rights and all of that kind of stuff. So after Cody's death, the Cody Institute was formed and was really the international arm of the work. and Extension continue to do the local arm of the work, but the two have always worked very closely together, and then officially merged, like I said, in 2021. But in the website, the link that I just shared, it'll tell you more about that. And then you can click on a community housing program, which is where you access all of the documents that we showed you on the screen. So I'll stop sharing there. And there's also a tremendous library here at St. FX called the Marie Michael Library. And that is a community development library that really has a lot of great resources about engaging community and learning from situations that have happened all around the world. So that's a great resource as well.
Thank you so incredibly much. Deborah says in the comments that we need community agitators, and that's really what social workers have always been. And really, the reason we have so much moral distress is that many of our members don't feel like they can speak out as much as we want them to because of who they're employed or how, whatever, for a variety of different reasons. And so the Social Justice Committee aims to be that voice. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers aims to be that voice. There are a few people who are talking about other ways to organize. If you are interested, September 19th, Tuesday from 12 to 1 is our communities of practice. And it would be awesome to have a community of practice that's dedicated just to housing insecurity and working together on this and taking the conversation that we heard today and thinking about how to amplify it, because we know that depression is oftentimes internalized rage, which we don't have ways of accessing and letting it out. So if we have outlets for our frustration at the injustice, then that we will feel better as a profession and as individuals, but also we can empower our clients, the people we work with, to have their voice there. And so grateful to all of you for all that you are sharing, all that you're doing, hopefully all that you're inspiring. Even if in our jobs, we can't do everything that we think we want to do or could do, the idea of volunteering, the idea of being part, you can get professional development credit for coming to this. It'll actually, if you do the communities of practice, it'll be vicarious trauma credit, which is another mandatory credit. So deeply grateful to all of you for your time, and we hope that you have a wonderful, inspiring rest of your day as we close our lunch hour, and stay tuned for more of our lunch hour trainings as we work to support our members and the incredible work that they do each and every day. Even if you feel like you're alone, you're not. We are part of something greater, and all that needs to happen is just tying the pieces between the wonderful work that's happening here and the wonderful work that's happening here. And that's how we begin to decolonize. That's how we stop those silos. And social workers are connectors. That's why we sometimes get into trouble, but that's why we are the agitators, as the chat is discussing. So Pauline, Nancy, so deeply grateful to you for taking time of your schedule to reschedule the conversation that didn't happen earlier and expand that conversation so that all of our members can be part of it. Thank you.
Great.
It's been
Thanks
our
for
pleasure
having us
here. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.